What's up, everybody? We have a great episode with Dr. Bill Rawls in store for you today. But before that, we wanted to talk quickly about our company, Ultralife.
Yes, shameless plug to work with us. So we're so excited and honored that we have so many athletes from all over the country. And if you want to take care of your health and fitness, you are an athlete. Yes, we do work with people who want to run races and have events coming up, but we also work with many people who just want to be as healthy as they can possibly be and have accountability along the way and the guidance. So we deliver everything via our app, and we write custom programming for your fitness, cardio, and strength
And lifestyle.
and lifestyle, meaning like step goals or recovery goals. And then nutrition is a big piece of this. So depending on what you're doing, we customize your nutrition and guide you along the way so that you're fueling your workouts properly, as well as your recovery, and that you just feel the best that you can feel through your nutrition. So no matter what your goal is, Mackie and I would love to support you on that journey. And it all starts with a free strategy session with one of us. So book a call with one of us, and we would love to see you in the Ultralife community. Welcome back, everyone, to the Longevity Lab. I'm your host, Juliet.
And I'm Mackie.
And today we have Dr. Bill Rawls on the show. For over 30 years, Dr. Bill Rawls has dedicated his life to medicine. When a health crisis in his early 40s abruptly changed his quality of life, he came face to face with the limitations of modern medicine and began to explore the vast possibilities of alternative treatments. Restoring his health through holistic and herbal therapies inspired him to share his revelations on the importance of cellular wellness. Today, he works to bring life and vitality to others as he helps them establish their own paths to wellness through modern herbology. He founded Vital Plan along with his daughter, Braden, and serves as the medical director. The company provides a science-backed system of herbs and key nutrients proven to defend against cellular stress and promote lasting wellness. Dr. Rawls has 2 grown children and lives on the North Carolina coast with his wife and golden retriever. He enjoys cooking, biking, hiking, and any activities that gets him out on the water. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I love that you have a golden retriever. We were just spending some time with our friends this past weekend, and they have a golden retriever, and they just seem like the most amazing, the epitome of man's best friend to me is the golden retriever dog.
Yeah, they're just laid back. They're always there, ready to go for a walk, whatever.
They're just down for whatever. They're so sweet.
Take out, go to the beach, out in the boat. Yeah, let's go. It's really fun.
Yeah. Well, I think to kick things off, your book, the Cellular Wellness Solution, Tap into Your Full Health Potential with the Science-Backed Power of Herbs, was written out of a personal experience that you had with your own health. And I would love to open with that and sharing what you went through and how you transitioned from being a specific type of physician and over the years getting more into integrative medicine.
Yeah, writing has always been my therapy. If I can figure something out enough that I can write it for other people, then I've figured it out for myself. And so it's been a journey. I'm been a physician, I guess, over 30 years now, and started my career in obstetrics and gynecology for a lot of reasons. Part of it was when I looked at medical management of chronic illness and the fact that people just basically stayed ill and on heavy medications. It just wasn't where I wanted to go. So I turned toward obstetrics and gynecology, which is dealing with younger patients, generally well people, bringing life into the world. It was really wonderful. But at the same time, 30 years ago, it required this really rigorous call schedule that I was on call for labor and delivery and hospital emergencies, 24-hour cycles of call every second to third day and every second to third weekend from Friday morning until Monday morning. And so it was rare when I was on call that I got a full night's sleep. That was unusual, and there were plenty of nights where I didn't sleep at all. That balancing just the stress of keeping up with community and family and everything else, it was highly stressful and really didn't leave a lot of time for good health habits. Exercising regularly was probably the biggest health habit that I had that was positive. And in my 30s, I could do it, just push through. But 40s, it started catching up with me. And by the end of my 40s, I just wasn't coping anymore. I lost the ability to sleep. But what's more, it wasn't just about being tired from not sleeping. My whole body started falling apart. I started having severe arthritis in all my joints, heart issues, brain fog, neurological symptoms. I was starting to worry about MS and issues like that, or Parkinson's. I started having a tremor. But none of the evaluations really showed much of anything. So I ended up just being stuck with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. And nobody really wants that because all you're going to get is medications for symptoms. That's about it. So kept searching, and it's like, there's got to be a reason for this thing. And did lots of different testing. Finally found I was carrying the microbe associated with Lyme disease. And it's like, yes, that's it. That's the answer. Get antibiotics, I'm going to be well. And the antibiotics made me sicker instead of better. And now I understand why, but back then I didn't. And it just put me right back to where I was in another situation that I just didn't understand. Long story short, I tried a lot of different kinds of things, and the things that worked the very best was herbal therapy, a specific protocol using high-grade concentrated extracts of specific herbs, I thought, to kill the microbes in my body. Now I realize it was a lot more complicated, and the herbs were doing a lot of things, but I got my life back. And I've spent the past 20 years understanding what was going on and helping other people. And again, writing has been part of that. I've written several books. I wrote a book about Lyme disease, and this latest book is really where my journey has come from since that point. And it's been an interesting ride for sure.
It's such a familiar story, the mystery diagnosis where it goes from maybe it's fibromyalgia, maybe it's Lyme disease, maybe it's a whole host of different things that they just can't figure out. And we've seen lots of friends who have gone through this struggle and never seem to really come onto the other side of it. So I think that this book has really powerful impact, that it can really reach people and really help people.
Well, it's about looking at that question of wellness and illness very differently. So in our conventional medical system, we divide everything up. The body seems so complicated, we divide it up into systems, and we have specialists for each system. We've got cardiologists and pulmonologists and neurologists and all these different people, and then subspecialists within the specialties. And what I can tell you is they're not looking at the problem in an appropriate way, in a logical fashion, and it makes it much more complex than it needs to be. So my working model for illness is basically the same for all illnesses. When you start looking at it from the point of view of looking at cells. So our body has organs, it has systems, but every one of those systems, all of those organs, all of our tissues are made up of cells. And so when you boil it down to a smallest functional unit, our body is a complex collection of living cells, but each one of those cells is an independently functioning unit. And we have different cells. Each cell has a job. But what illness is when cellular functions break down. So we feel great when our cells feel great, when our cells are healthy. So if our cells aren't getting what they need to stay healthy, then communications in the body start breaking down, cellular functions start breaking down, and things don't work as well. Our heart starts acting up, our joints fall apart. All of these things are really important. So a state of wellness is a state of cellular health. A state of illness is a state of cellular distress. And so what we're missing in our conventional system is we're not looking at the root causes of cellular stress. We're just treating the symptoms and manifestations of the illness. So people don't ever get well. They just end up in this state of managed illness. So looking at it at the cellular level just opens up the conversation in a whole different way.
Do you think that when you were going through your own health issues that it was because of the circumstances and the lifestyle that you were leading that led to the health conditions? Or I know you mentioned finding out that you had Lyme's, but do you think that that Lyme's would have maybe even presented itself, or was the other things that maybe brought it out? I'm just curious what you've gathered, because from my understanding, sometimes we can be exposed to things, but maybe they don't even come out unless
They don't manifest.
They don't manifest. But if we are not taking care of ourselves, we're not sleeping, we're not eating well, we're under a lot of stress, then they can manifest. I'm curious how that was for you.
That's where it gets interesting. Yeah. So when we look at the body as being made up of trillions of cells, but each cell is an independently functioning unit, you ask that question, well, what do cells need to be healthy? There are only 5 categories of things that define cellular wellness. And this is where this is the simple part. This is what pulls it all together. It's really as simple as this. Our cells need the right nutrients. That's number one. They need the right nutrients. And when you eat a good whole food diet that's very diverse, you're giving all of your cells all the things that they need. So number one, good nutrients. Our cells need a clean environment to function. So when we're exposed to toxic substances, things are toxic to us because they get in our system, either breathing them in or eating them in food or water or wherever we get them. And they basically are absorbed into our cells, but they compromise cellular functions. So think of throwing sand into a motor. The motor might still work, but it's not going to work as well and it's going to burn out faster. But that's what's happening with all the environmental toxins and all the other toxic things that we're exposed to in our environment. So cells need a clean environment to function properly. Cells need good blood flow. And that comes from being physically active. You all know about this one. The number one, the most important thing that exercise does is increase blood flow. So our cells are constantly putting out metabolic waste and trying to purge themselves of these toxic substances. And that collects in that space around the cells. And you need regular pushes of flow to clear those things out of the way. So when that happens best is with exercise. So good blood flow, really important. Number 4 is downtime. And this is the one that got me the very most. Our cells need to recover. That's a really cool thing about our cells. Unlike your car or your cell phone, they can repair themselves. So cells are constantly rebuilding and regenerating. But if they don't have downtime to do that, if they're constantly working, if they're constantly on alert, they can't do that. So 8 hours of sleep at night and periods of rest during the day are essential to rebuild our cells. So if you start your day feeling tired, it's because your cells didn't get that recovery time they needed at night to start that next day. So recovery time is really important. And then protection from microbes. Microbes are our cells' arch enemy. And we think about infections, microbes trying to infect us. And we don't think about what they're trying to do. Basically, we're food for microbes. They all need food. All living things are food for something else. We're food for microbes. And they're trying to constantly get into our bloodstream and in our tissues to basically consume us, to generate food, to grow more microbes. So we can go into that a little deeper if you like. But
yeah, I'd love to go into the microbes a little bit deeper, and just overall everything you're speaking about. It doesn't seem anything too out of the ordinary. I'm sure as our listeners are thinking about, okay, nutrients, we need to make sure that we're eating well. Exercise, yes. The environment piece, I think, is coming up more and more now. People are realizing just how many different toxic chemicals we're exposed to, and plastics and all things like that we never really thought about. Yeah. All the endocrine disruptors, that's a big, people talk about that a lot now. So all of these things, seem like, okay, yeah, it's the implementation, I think, and the understanding of how to really do that can be challenging for many people. And I think overcomplicating it too with so much advice out there around this is how we should eat, right? This is how we should exercise. This is how we should sleep. So I'd love to hear from you before we go into microbes, just some touch points on that and what around those tenets that are helpful for patients.
Yeah, I think everybody talks about genetics and we talk about our risk of disease, getting genetic testing and all of that. And genes don't really cause illness. What our genes do is define how we tolerate different stress factors, right? Mm-hmm. And it really comes from how our great ancestors lived. So whatever microbes, foods, toxic substances, etc., that our great ancestors were exposed to over hundreds of thousands of years, how our cells handle those things is built into our genes. So we have to live. We talk about going to Mars. If we go to Mars, we're going to have to duplicate the conditions of the Earth's environment very exactly, or we're not going to survive, because that's what our genes are built for. And it's because that's what has carried us along. So when you look at what kinds of things are good for us, it's nice to look at, well, how have humans lived? Well, for hundreds of thousands of years, they foraged for food. They ate, in most locations, about 2/3 plant matter and 1/3 very lean meat, but they didn't eat just the meat, they ate the whole animal, and they used the whole animal. And this went on for hundreds of thousands of years. We didn't start farming until about 10,000 years ago. And comparatively, that's a pretty short period of time. So our genes are built for the stress factors that our great ancestors that were foraging did. So this may sound like an endorsement of the paleo diet, and it's not completely, because we have had some modifications as we've eaten grain and other foods over the past 10,000 years. But you have to respect that ancient diet. And so as far as foods, I've got it down to 4 basic categories of things to stay healthy. 1, eat a whole food diet. Why whole foods? Whole foods are whole cells. So it's like an apple is it's got a lot of carbohydrate, but it's made of cells. All this carbohydrate is captured inside the cells. So all the parts of those little cells are all the nutrients that our cells need to function. So when you eat a whole food diet, especially a diverse whole food diet that has lots of different kinds of foods in it, our great ancestors ate an average of 500 plants a year, different plants. We do maybe a dozen or 2. So we're just not getting the same kind of diversity.
I think sometimes where people will push back on this a lot is, well, people didn't live a very long time back then. So why should we take that information into the longevity conversation when the average age was, 30 something, or I hear that a lot. And so I'd love to hear more from you on that.
Yeah, it's true. They didn't live very long, but how they live still set our genes for what we tolerate best today. I think that's important to recognize. Mm-hmm. And no, they didn't live very long, but they didn't die of chronic illness, all right? So you think about it, they were living out in open space and so it's not that died of a chronic illness early. They just didn't get to live very long because of the risk of accidents, snake bites, being eaten by something, all of these things. And that goes on worldwide. Every 5 minutes, somebody is getting bitten by a poisonous snake somewhere around the world. Well, think about living outdoors all the time. And there were just so many physical threats. So in the category of cellular stress, I also put physical factors like trauma. And most people died of trauma. Interestingly, they probably didn't die of infectious diseases, because when you look at that aspect, they were living in small tribes. So the microbes that they were exposed to were the same microbes that everybody had been exposed to over and over and over again. So they didn't have new threatening microbes coming in very often. So that was less of a problem than it is now. When we became industrialized and everybody moved into cities where everybody was concentrated, then we started trading around the world. Then we started spreading microbes around more. But so our great ancestors weren't exposed to that as much, but they did have trauma. And I think that when you look at primitive populations that live today, like the Hazda population in Africa, they typically die early of trauma of some kind.
So going back to the nutrition protocols that you recommend for cellular wellness, whole foods diet.
Whole foods
So
diet.
2/3, it sounds like plant-based, 1/3 meat. And do you recommend eating more like organ meat and things like that to get more?
I think everybody's different. So, number one is try to eat whole foods as much as you can. Number two is eat more vegetables than anything else, not fruit and vegetables, vegetables. And if you get that half vegetables in, then you can do what works for you. It's like when I was going through this, I developed a lot of nut sensitivities. I would eat chocolate chips and nuts all day if I could, but my system doesn't tolerate them. Some people choose not to eat meat. I think that's okay. But you really need to I've met some really unhealthy vegetarians who are eating mostly grain and beans and not getting in vegetables. So that vegetable content is really, really important. Healthy proteins and that sort of thing are secondary to that, but get those vegetables in and then mix it up. The third thing is the carbohydrate thing. We're just killing ourselves with carbohydrates with all the processed foods. So you look at a donut, it's not contained inside cells like an apple. It's just raw carbohydrate and fat that's been extracted from a seed as flour. So that is really damaging to our cells. I use the analogy of a steam locomotive. So if you got onto a steam locomotive and you put on the brakes, solid, hard, but stoke the engine as hard as you could without that engine going anywhere, sooner or later it's going to blow up. That's what we're doing when we're dumping so much carbohydrate into our cells. So I try to keep my carbohydrate count around 150 grams a day. That's not ketogenic. I don't think you have to be ketogenic to be healthy. And if you're more athletic, you may need a little bit more carbohydrate. But keeping it down to a reasonable level, that allows you to enjoy your food a little bit. Sometimes a ketogenic diet forces you to eat a lot of meat fat, and it's just not as comfortable. And I found about 150 grams is pretty comfortable. So that's number 3. Number 4 is this concept of intermittent fasting, and that can be anything from 6 hours to as much as 12 hours, but leaving a window for your body just to process the food. We also know that up to 16 hours of fasting per day optimizes autophagy. Autophagy is the process by which cells rebuild themselves. So doing those
when
things.
you're saying the 6 to 12 hours, are you talking about a window of eating? Or
Window
are you
of
talking
eat.
about a window of eating? Okay.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of controversy around the intermittent fasting, particularly for women that I've researched quite a bit around hormonal health and what women seem to do best with versus men seem to be able to do longer fasts, whereas women seem to have difficulty with fasting for hormones. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Yeah, I think you have to do what is comfortable for you. And I think these guidelines are meant for people to be able to find that sweet spot that makes them comfortable. I'll never forget when my kids were young, we were part of a tennis club, and there was this guy that was age 93 that was out there playing tennis still. And I asked him one time, I said, what is it? What's your secret?
What's your secret? Yeah.
And he said very, very quickly, I only eat one meal a day. That's it. And I eat one meal in the afternoon and I don't eat any more than that. And it's like, oh, okay. That makes some sense. But you're right. Not everybody tolerates that. I like a light breakfast. I try to concentrate most of my food in the middle of the day, and I try to finish and not eat after about 6 o'clock in the evening. That works for me. A lot of people do skip breakfast. I found that I just feel a little better with something in the morning to get going. but I'm probably keeping mine to about 8 hours. Some people need that 12 hours. And if you look back at how our ancient ancestors lived, well, they got up, started moving around, and started foraging, and they just ate throughout the day. And when it got dark, they quit and slept. So they probably had an average of about 10 to 12 hours.
This is where it can get a bit confusing for people because there isn't this ideal and there isn't this panacea or this is the answer for every single person that's going to ensure that you have cellular wellness and that you live to be into your 90s playing tennis, right? Because I've met someone who was close to that age. I remember my brother and I asked this guy the same thing because we were all at this creek and swimming and we were hiking and the guy was hiking over the rocks and jumping from rock to rock. And I was like, what? How are you doing this? And he shared with me not one meal a day. He eats several meals a day, but he did share with me that he really doesn't eat sugar and that he does eat whole foods. That was one thing he made sure to say, and that he stays active, right? So it's not like everybody has to eat one meal a day or everybody has to do this specific thing, but it sounds like there are some kind of principles in this that I'm extrapolating that it's important for us to think about.
Yeah. If I had to break it down to 3 things only, it would be whole foods, eat more vegetables than anything else, and keep your carb count of basically what you're burning in a day and not over to that. I added the intermittent fasting just because so many people were attuned to that, just to make a statement on it that I don't think you have to be extreme with it. I think you can do what's comfortable for you.
And I think even a 12-hour fast is very reasonable if you wake up and have breakfast at 7 a.m. and stop eating by 7 p.m. That's very doable for me, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
all about
just to
making
give
life
your body
comfortable.
time to regenerate, right? To repair, it sounds like. So I would love to hear more about the piece on the microbes because I'm not very familiar with this aspect.
All right. Well, that's the other things. Just keeping a clean environment, keeping your air clean as much as you can, taking walks in forest. That's where you find the cleanest air. Out in Colorado is a great place to do that. And clean food, clean water. Getting that sleep is just so important. Keeping your cells healthy is your best defense against microbes. And the fact of the matter is our whole medical system is focused on very visible microbes, Ebola virus, AIDS, now COVID. And it really isn't paying attention to the connection between chronic illness and what I call low-grade pathogens or stealth microbes. This is just, our whole system is designed really around acute illness, and we just don't do a very good job with chronic illness. Conventional physicians haven't made this connection between these low-grade pathogens and chronic illnesses. And I think Lyme disease has really been an open door for that. So the fact of the matter is we're exposed to things all through our lifetime. And from the time we emerge in the world, and maybe even before, and start putting things in our mouths and being connected to other people, getting bug bites, getting cat scratches and dog nips and hamster scratches, we're picking up microbes. And most of these things are low-grade pathogens. They're things that we have built-in immunity against. Sometimes we feel it as an infection. We get colds or flus or whatever. But a lot of times these things enter our system and we don't even know it. We think of our body, our tissues, and our bloodstream as being sterile, basically. I always was taught this. You don't have microbes. And it turns out our bloodstream is more like a freeway of microbes than it is a sterile space. Right now, while you and I are talking, microbes are crossing over from our sinuses, from our gut, into our bloodstream and traveling around in our body. And so, again, our immune system recognizes these things. We have built-in immunity, but these microbes, all microbes have these really sophisticated ways of maintaining a presence. And that's really all that they need to do to complete their mission. is maintain a presence in our body. So basically what they want is a food supply and a platform to spread to other hosts. And they don't need to make us severely ill to make that happen. In fact, in some respects, you would have to say that a really severe microbe, a threatening microbe like Ebola virus, isn't very successful because it kills all of its hosts pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So an ideal situation for a microbe is that they can just take up residence for good.
Well,
And
this is making me think a lot about some of the long COVID symptoms that so many people have been describing since being exposed.
Yeah, it's true. So when we look at how threatening a microbe is, a virus, a bacteria, whatever kind of pathogen we're talking about, it's really about whether we have built-in immunity. How aggressive the microbe is really doesn't matter. They're all aggressive. It's whether we have built-in immunity. So Ebola is really bad because humans have never been exposed to it and we have zero built-in immunity. So when that hits our body, there's nothing to stop it. When you look at all the colds and flus and things that we're exposed to during our lives and bacteria like mycoplasma, chlamydia, tick-borne microbes, all the tick-borne microbes are low-grade pathogens. They typically don't cause severe illness acutely. And that's the big deal. Most people get a tick bite. Every time you get a tick bite, microbes enter your system. They found that one tick species carries over 237 different families of bacteria.
Wow.
That's hundreds and hundreds of bacteria. And we don't know what most of them do. So we're getting microbes, we're getting infusions of bacteria and other things every time we get a tick bite, a flea bite, any kind of insect bite. But we have immunity to these things because ticks have been big biting humans since the beginning of time. All of our great ancestors were constantly bitten by all kinds of different kinds of insects. And so they were getting infusions of these things all along. And so we do have built-in immunity to these things. COVID, it's a medium to low-grade pathogen when you really look at it. Half of people that are exposed don't get sick at all. What that tells you is we have built-in immunity. Now, this is a new virus that jumped over from another host, but there are a lot of other coronaviruses, so most of us have had similar exposure to similar microbes. So, like Ebola virus, mortality is 60%. COVID, it's more like 1%. That's that. When you talk about an entire world's population being exposed, that's a lot of people that were dead. But it's still pretty low grade when you look at the big scheme of things. So when these things enter our system, our immune system knows it. It is on top of it. Whether they enter through a respiratory infection, a bug bite, no matter what, however they enter the bloodstream, if we have built-in immunity, there's a confrontation between the microbe and the immune system that we sometimes feel. We get lethargy, malaise, fever, etc. That's that war between the microbe and the immune system. But a lot of times it's so low grade that doesn't even happen. But where my studies have carried me is realizing that no matter what the situation with every microbe encounter, some microbes make it past the immune system's defenses. And when they do, they have the ability to invade cells. And if our cells are healthy, it may stop right there. So we all think about our immune system being our main level of defense against microbes, but we actually have another level of defense in that our cells, using that process of autophagy, our cells can expel or destroy microbes. And they typically do. So it's a really important part of our defense system that doesn't get enough notice. So if our cells are healthy, a lot of times those microbes get halted right there at that spot. And here I'm not talking about a cell, I'm talking about potentially brain cells and heart cells and joint cells and everywhere in the body, because the bloodstream is circulating all these things. Not only that, these microbes, all the pathogens that I've studied have the ability to invade white blood cells or sometimes red blood cells and use that as a vehicle to be carried throughout the body. They call it a Trojan horse mechanism. So it can cross over into the blood and into the brain across the blood-brain barrier. So microbes have these really sophisticated ways of getting around and penetrating cells. So when a microbe invades a cell, whether it's a bacteria, virus, protozoa, it doesn't matter, 3 things can happen. One possibility is that a healthy cell can destroy that microbe. The second is that the cell isn't healthy, the microbe gains the upper hand, basically invades the cell, turns it into a resource, breaks it down for food, and then comes out and invades other cells. And that's how that makes us sick. Damaging our cells, harming our cells is how microbes cause a lot of the symptoms that we have. But a third possibility, and this one is really interesting, is the microbe can just go dormant. And think about that. It's a great survival mechanism. And all microbes have the ability to do that. If you look at all of the mass of all microbes on Earth at any given point of time, 60% of them are dormant. So if conditions aren't favorable for microbe growth, they can just go dormant.
Is this sort of like shingles as an example?
Shingles would be one example. Epstein-Barr virus, we hear a lot about. That's another example, but there are many, many examples that we could look at. So, yeah, so these things can just go dormant. And it turns out that that's probably happening throughout our lifetime, that things that we pick up get past the immune system, invade our cells, and become dormant. And that's true of microbes from our gut, from our sinuses, from our skin are also doing this same thing. Evidence shows that we have a microbiome of the brain made up of hundreds of species of bacteria. If we're healthy, probably mostly dormant. And these microbes are basically in the cells of our brain. Now, you have to remember that a bacteria is about 1,000 times smaller than our cell. So they can just wall off. The cell keeps right on working like they weren't there. And they just hang out indefinitely. And I think that's what happened to me. I picked up these tick-borne microbes when I was a kid, and they stayed in my system all that time. But then when I went for years without sleep and poor diet and chronic stress and just pushing every stress button, I stressed my cells enough to allow these things to reactivate. And when they reactivate, they not only break down that cell, they emerge from that cell and start invading other surrounding cells. And that's when we start having symptoms. And it's not in one place in the body, it can be throughout the body, and it's not just one microbe. It's whatever you've been exposed to may be reactivating at different times.
This makes a lot of sense with what Mackie was sharing, that we've had so many clients and friends throughout the years share their multitude of symptoms that they cannot figure out a root cause. It's from GI issues to brain health issues to having joint pains to lethargy, and it's a host of things. And sometimes it'll be better and then it'll get worse. And it's just this roller coaster for years of trying to see different specialists and understanding what could be going on here. And then I know for one of my friends that I was talking about, she got COVID and that amplified some of these things. So that was an amplification of the symptoms that she had been experiencing for some time. And then new ones came on, right? So it's like, I'm having a good day today, then maybe she's having a bad day another day. And I hear this a lot with people. And usually it's this umbrella of you have some sort of autoimmune condition.
Yeah, well, think about it. So you have this situation where you're stressed for years and you have eruptions of microbes. And that's why I think we have so many different illnesses, because different microbes we pick up and have preference for invading different cells. So you have reactivation of different microbes from different tissues. And so I don't see chronic illness as a diagnosis anymore. I see it more as this other thing that's happening within people, looking at the causes. So this thing reactivates and you have all these microbes emerging at one time from cells within a certain tissue. Well, the immune system sees that and says, we can't have that, and it starts attacking the cells where the microbes are emerging from. If that isn't a great explanation for autoimmunity, I don't know what is. But the
Yeah.
deal is, if you look at tests for autoimmunity, it shows that we all have some level of autoimmunity. So I think we all have some level of reactivation all the time. I've for years used this analogy of a pot on the stove. If you've got a pot on the stove and it's got some heat and a little bit of heat and it's on a low simmer, we're all at a low simmer. But if you add heat in the form of stress, it starts to boil, and at some point you start having symptoms, but at some point it starts boiling over. And that's
Yeah.
what chronic illness is. So we all have some autoimmunity. We all have reactivation of some microbes all the time. And our cells and our immune system are constantly dealing with this. But throw in that component of adding in more and more cellular stress, and you end up with a pot boiling over.
What have you seen as far as trauma and this manifesting through that? Because that's something that I've seen. I have mixed feelings on this, where there will be physicians or practitioners who want to say that the manifestation of your illness is because you have post-traumatic stress, or there's some sort of emotional trauma that occurred that now this is the outcome. But then here we are talking, there are real microbes these are real things affecting the cells. And stress, of course, can come from having emotional, mental stress. But this is where things get a little bit foggy for me, because I feel like that's really hard for somebody to be given that as the answer to their physical health problems. Like, actually, it's just your trauma.
Well, I talked about those 5 requirements that cells need to be healthy. You can flip that around as forms of stress. So the other side of that is 5 categories of stress that we can be exposed to. So there's nutritional stress, cells not getting the nutrients. There's toxic stress of not only environmental toxins, but also radiation and other kinds of things. But that mental stress category is another whole category of just when we look at our cells, all have to communicate with one another, right? So for us to work as a unit, cells have to be in communication. So all cells are in constant contact with all other cells in the body. And they do that through hormones and chemical messengers. And the brain is constantly monitoring everything outside and inside the body and using hormone pathways and nerves to coordinate cellular function so that they're all synchronized, right? So going back to our ancient ancestors, they didn't have the kind of stress that we have. They didn't have clocks. They didn't have schedules. They didn't have any way of predicting what might happen tomorrow, but we do. And so it messes up our method of dealing with that. So that ancient thing is people weren't stressed unless there was a visible stress. They saw a tiger and that changed their physiology. The brain said, okay, we don't need to digest food. We don't need to worry about some of these basic maintenance functions. We have to get away from this tiger. So that switched us into that fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous system, that all the unnecessary things got put on hold until we got away from that tiger. Our world today, we're running from the tiger 24/7. And so it puts our body in constant alert mode. And when we do that, the brain is constantly pushing our cells in alert mode. So they're working overtime. We're not getting sleep. We're not taking downtime. And we're pushing that stress button to the point that we run our cells down. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge cellular stress factor. Yeah. And when you stress your cells enough, then the stress weakens the cells and it allows that reactivation of microbes. So it really is a very elegant explanation for really any scenario.
That makes a lot of sense, whether it's an emotional situation that is causing you to feel that kind of hormonal response in your body, or if it's a work stress that's causing that. They all play their role. I guess something I'm wondering is the world isn't getting any less complicated, right? How can we, unless we decide that we're going to make our lives less complicated? I know we have a lot of agency in some of these things and how we take care of ourselves, right? Making choices around what we put in our body, if we are going to scroll on our phone before bed or put it away and really try to get that 8 hours of sleep. We do have a lot of agency in that way. But what are some ways that we can become more resilient? And I would love to go into the herbs that you have been discovering and supporting you. And are there certain herbs that you find that can be helpful for the nervous system to help people with less stress in their body, even if they still have that job and they still have the crazy life that they're leading?
Yeah. Herbs do extraordinary things. And not to say that we don't need to do our share. We all need to work on our diet. We all need to try to clean up our environment. We all need to at least work toward that 8 hours of sleep every night. Average in America is 6.5. It's just not enough. We do need to be physically active. And if we don't do those things, we're not going to be healthy. It's as simple as that. But basically, when we take herbs, we are borrowing a plant's defense and regulatory systems. And that's very important. So plants are multicellular organisms just like we are. Plants don't have a cellular immune system like ours. They have a chemical immune system. So all plants are building out complex chemistry to neutralize viruses, bacteria, all kinds of threatening pathogens. At the same time, they're building chemicals to neutralize toxic substances, radiation, and virtually everything. Even carbohydrates. I found that most herbs actually protect us from the toxic effects of carbohydrates on our cells, which is really interesting. But plants also use a lot of the same chemical messengers that we use to regulate cellular functions. So when we take an herb, it has the effect of balancing our stress hormones and making us more resilient, especially herbs that we define as adaptogens. So the herbal properties are really wonderful in thinking about them as borrowing this cellular protection from the plant to boost our own. And when we look at that, it explains a lot of the functions of plants. And that was a question that I had many discussions with my father, who was a very conventional physician. And he said, I know I can use this drug to treat this problem, this symptom. And I hear about herbs that it can treat this and that and all kinds of different things. And it's like, how is that? And I couldn't answer him until years later, and he had actually passed on by then. But it's that the plant, we're protecting ourselves. So when we look at disease as cellular stress with reactivation of microbes, we're adding this extra level of cellular protection by protecting ourselves from various kinds of microbes. But it's not like an antibiotic. When you take an herb, it's selective for pathogens. That's really interesting. So back when I was trying to cure my problem with antibiotics, it would only be about 2 or 3 weeks and my gut would be so disrupted I would have to stop the antibiotic. So I took the herbs to kill the microbes, I thought. That was to kill these Lyme microbes. And I thought, well, if they actually work, then I'm going to have the same gut issues. And I didn't. And I kept taking them. And all my symptoms went away. And at first it was like, well, I must be killing the microbes. Now I realize what I was doing was strengthening my cells, suppressing a lot of different kinds of reactivated microbes. And so they were doing a lot of things all at once, but they weren't disrupting my normal flora. And that makes sense. The plant would like to protect its friendly flora and only pathogens. So these hundreds of chemicals, it's actually a system, not a random killer like an antibiotic. And there's very good evidence that they have very good antimicrobial properties. In fact, every single herb that you hear about has antimicrobial properties. And I think that's a primary benefit from all herbs. Now, some herbs are better antimicrobials than others. Depends on the microbe stress and the plant's natural environment. But all plants have antimicrobial properties. All plants have antioxidants. All plants have substances that neutralize toxins and radiation. So that's built into the whole herbal thing. And I'm finding that's where the primary benefit is. Now, what you find is different herbs have slightly different properties. They are maybe better for certain viruses than certain bacteria. And again, it gets back to that the stress factors from where the plant comes from. But it really helps you understand how herbs are working. And yeah, that was a fun part of things that I learned, is just moving along to understand. It just, all the pieces started fitting together. It was really neat.
I really found it fascinating in the book when you started to feel better, but you had run out of the herbs, and then you didn't order any right away, and you started to feel the symptoms coming back until you reordered the herbs, and then over time the symptoms would gradually decrease and you would start to gradually feel better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was using them as therapy. I'm going to treat the illness, and then when the illness is gone, then I'm going to stop doing them. And I came to a place that it was like, well, I feel better when I'm taking the herbs. I'm not having any side effects like I typically do with drugs. Well, why not just continue them? So I've been taking herbs now continually for probably 20 years. Not the high doses that I did at one point for over about a 5-year period, but it keeps me very resilient. At age 66, I'm getting to do a lot of things that people at my age don't do. And that was after overcoming a pretty major health crisis.
How would one know which herbs would best suit them? How do they test for what microbes they even have or what's going on to then know which herbs would correlate with that?
Yeah, we're not good enough to test the full range of microbes. And testing it's not as good as most people think.
That's what I've coming to realize in the last podcast. We talked about, what did we talk about? I forget. We talked about it on a recent podcast where, oh yeah, it was just about hormonal testing because that's so popular now, but we really can't even test hormones properly to understand exactly what's happening.
Well, just as an aside, think about this thing, all right? So what hormones do is synchronize cellular functions. Every cell in the body has to talk to every other cell in the body for us to function as a unit. That's a very, very dynamic process. It's constantly changing. There are literally hundreds and hundreds, possibly even thousands of messengers. And it's not just chemicals. Our cells actually use biophotons to communicate with each other. So there's a lot of different kinds of messaging going on. So we're trying to get, I think about it this way. When we do hormone testing, we're taking just a sample of one hormone from this very complex dynamic thing going on, and then we're using it to try to define what's going on in the body. And it's like watching a 1-minute clip of a 2-hour movie that you just don't get the full picture because it's constantly changing. And not only that, you're just getting one or a few hormones. And so there's certain situations like postmenopausal hormone replacement that it works, but a lot of hormone replacement, it doesn't work so well because here we are inserting this one constant into a very dynamic situation. I use the analogy of like if you had a group of 6 people sitting around a table and they were all trying to solve a problem. And there was a very dynamic conversation going on trying to solve this problem. And somebody walks in with a soapbox and pulls out a bullhorn and starts screaming. It just messes up the whole conversation and keeps the group from doing. So that's the danger of using hormone therapy is you can actually mess things up worse because you don't know the language.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like for a lot of testing, and tomorrow, actually, I have an appointment to go see my naturopath. And there's always lots of blood work that is ordered, right? And there's lots of these tests done. And I've found it difficult to navigate this world of extrapolating real good, solid information from these tests of then what am I supposed to do with it? Where are we supposed to go with it?
I went through that phase that I was like, I'm going to be I'm a functional medicine doctor. I'm an integrative doctor. And I went to all these courses to learn about the hormones and how to do all the testing. And I just found it to be really, really complicated. And I found that the more that I talked to the person and understood what the stress factors were that were causing them to be ill, then I didn't need to do a lot of testing. And I really got away from the testing. Here's the deal. Your body is constantly communicating with you. Symptoms are cellular stress. If you have symptoms, then your body is telling you exactly what's wrong. And it's really important to pay attention to that. And so when we do testing, we're just getting little teeny samples of this very complex system, especially hormones. All hormones are produced by cells, and hormones are disrupted when there's stress within the body, when cells are stressed. If you take care of the things that are driving the stress within those 5 categories that I talked about, then your hormones are all going to naturally balance, because when your cells are healthy, they're going to work. When your cells are healthy, they're going to be able to communicate. So hormone imbalances self-correct if you address cellular stress factors. It's really as simple as that.
I think everybody is looking for the magical supplement, right, to take. Then they don't have to do the 8 hours of sleep or the exercise or the nutrition, right? It's because it's effort to do all of those things, but really that's the foundation of it all.
Yeah. We have to live within the margins of what our cells are designed for. And it's
what humans need to thrive, right? There's some things we need to at least have a chance at thriving. Yep. And those are those categories that you mentioned early on. As far as herbs go, do you have, a few that obviously everyone needs to think about what exactly would work for them and maybe talk to you about this or another professional, but are there certain herbs that you find are really wonderful for us humans that help us a lot?
Well, that's the other thing, is not all plants are going to be something that we should take as herbs. A lot of plants are. In fact, there are more plants that are beneficial to us than otherwise, but nobody would make the mistake of eating poison ivy for health benefits. So certain plants produce chemicals that are harmful to us. Certain plants are poisonous, but actually most of them are beneficial. And so there are a lot of great herbs out there. I like herbs that don't have very much in the way of drug-like properties, that are really just protecting cells. And I have my own list, but there are lots of herbs out there. So adaptogens of any kind, people are hearing about adaptogens. Basically, adaptogens are herbs that protect cells, and that's how they protect us from stress. So one of my favorite adaptogens is rhodiola, that is native to Siberia, but it's actually been found in the Appalachians of North America. So you find similar plants all over the world. So if you have an herb that's native to China, there's pretty good chance that there's something native to North Carolina that's pretty darn close, or native to North America that's pretty close. So rhodiola is a favorite. It's great for adapting to physical stress. It helps us oxygenate our tissues better because it enhances blood flow. When my kids used to drag me from sea level straight up to the advanced slopes at Breckenridge, within 24 hours, I'd always take a big load of rhodiola, and that would help me, and I never got altitude sickness.
That's great. Yeah, we do the same thing. We go up whenever we're going up to 10,000 feet. I have some rhodiola that we'll take, and
also cordyceps. I think we tried cordyceps.
Cordyceps too. Yep. That's another favorite, cordyceps. So we look at plants, but also mushrooms have a lot of these same chemicals or similar chemicals. So reishi mushroom is another favorite. Antiviral properties, has some of the most potent anti-cancer properties. By the way, every herb that I've studied has been defined as having anti-cancer properties, because there's a strong link between cancer and these dormant microbes. And so antimicrobial and anti-cancer properties are pretty much built into every herb. Turmeric, that's a great anti-inflammatory herb. I love that one. Does have some good antimicrobial properties. Cordyceps, you mentioned, that's an herb that I take regularly. I really love that. Some of our antimicrobial herbs, and here there's some herbs that stimulate our immune system, like echinacea and elderberry, that are great for an acute viral illness, but we don't want to take these long term because we don't want to stimulate our immune system.
Interesting.
So herbs that have antimicrobial properties but are immune modulators, they balance immune functions. Top of my list is Chinese skullcap. I'm often asked, well, if you were on a desert island, could have one herb, would it be? It would be Chinese skullcap, because it's such a good immune modulator, but it has great broad spectrum antimicrobial properties. Second to that, Japanese knotweed, a great source of resveratrol that we find in grapes and wine. It's actually, Japanese knotweed is a better source, but it has extraordinary broad spectrum antimicrobial properties, along with protecting our tissues, anti-cancer properties, everything else. So they're all great self-protectants, but those are just a few on my list.
What are your thoughts on ashwagandha? It's a hot one in the adaptogenic world lately.
That's another favorite. Actually, the first product I ever formulated had a high-grade ashwagandha extract, along with a few other herbs for helping with hot flashes, because these chemical messengers. So one characteristic of an adaptogen is they balance our stress hormones. Like I said, we've got the defense properties of the plant, but also the regulatory properties. And a lot of those chemicals help balance our stress hormones, which help us, it tones down that fight or flight response so that our cells aren't on high alert. They can recover better. So that aspect is really important too. Ashwagandha has some nice antimicrobial properties too.
Great.
So I'm imagining that this is exciting Mackie, because Mackie loves to take things, and I'm the person who has a really bad, like I've low compliance whenever I'm given like herbs and things to take. He's the opposite, where he'll take all 20. So we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here. But is it too much for someone to take the ashwagandha and the cordyceps and the rhodiola? Because all these sound great. So they just start ordering up all the supplements and they're taking the recommended daily dosages on the bottles. You know, how do we know how much and which ones?
What's really interesting is that when you take herbs together, or especially certain herbs, that there's a synergy, that you actually have more of an effect when you combine herbs. I like to think about it like if you went to a symphony and you sat down in the auditorium and there was one violin, and that violinist played beautiful music and it was nice. But then you add in several more violins and the rest of the string section and the brass and the percussion and everything. Then you start getting this magnificent sound that's more than any of the single instruments. It's the same thing with the herbs, is that chemistry is going to interact and blend. And that's something that's been recognized since we've been using herbs, is herbalists have used formulas of combining anything from 5 to a dozen herbs together to get this synergy, to get more of an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was given Herbal they were adaptogens, and it was a bunch of them in one, and it was to help with my nervous system for sleep, to take at around 4 p.m. That was the recommend, taken later in the day, to then start the wind down process, because I know I'm not alone in that. I am the wired but tired person oftentimes.
Yeah, me too. That was the thing. When I was struggling with sleep issues, it's kind of like, well, my partners were doing this too. Why were they having this effect? And I realized that when someone was in labor, they would go and crash in the call room, and the nurse would have to physically drag them out of bed to get them to go and do the delivery. Whereas me, I was awake. If somebody was in labor or somebody was in the hospital, I was awake. I just couldn't sleep because my brain was just keyed into that person. So I didn't sleep as much as some people slept in that same condition.
Maybe in your ancestors, you were a part of the watcher who stays up late at night and makes sure that everybody's okay in the tribe.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, I think some of us are wired more in that way where we're just more high alert and other people can just fall right asleep. They can fall asleep anywhere. I've never been someone who can fall asleep anywhere. I'm always like, my ears are like dog ears, always ready to know what's going on.
Yeah, me too. My whole life.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on quality and potency, and if someone is interested in purchasing some herbs, how do they know they're actually getting what they think they're getting?
Yeah, about half the time, unfortunately, they're not.
Yeah.
And I always caution people when you go to a website and it sounds impressive and they've got all this science and it's just the marketing is just so exceptionally good. But then when you go look for the ingredients, you can't find them or they're buried somewhere. And that's a telltale sign that you're probably getting an inferior product and they're putting all their money into the marketing instead of actually creating a good product. So when you look at herbs, you can grow them in your garden and consume them directly, of course, or do a tea. But if you really want to get the concentrations of the chemistry, what we call the phytochemicals, then you really, in this day and time, a supplement is the only practical way to consistently do that. And just 3 basic preparations out there, most common preparations. So the first would be a whole herb powder. And this is what you're getting in a capsule in most products. And if you're paying like 15 or 20 bucks for something off the internet, this is what you're getting. Basically, they take the herb, whether it's the stems and leaves or roots or whatever, and they dry that, grind it up into a powder and put it into capsules. So basically what you're getting is a lot of fiber, not much chemistry of the herb at all. Mm-hmm. So your lower grade products, and if you look on the bottle, it may give the name of the herb. It might say just Japanese knotweed and that's it. And it might give a milligram quantity. Or you see it as what's called a proprietary blend, that you'll see a milligram quantity, but they'll just list the herbs and they don't give the quantities of each herbs. That's a really good way to hide inferior ingredients. So if not much money, just whole herb powders, they can do a little bit. They're okay if you're just wanting to try herbs, but don't expect much there. And I think that's why a lot of people are disappointed with herbs.
Yeah.
It's like I tried ashwagandha and didn't get much of benefit from it. Then I tried a trademark special extract that was 10 times more potent. And it was like, wow, yeah, this is really doing something. So the second preparation are tinctures. Most people are familiar with tinctures. That's better than just a whole herb powder. So tincture, they take the plant, put it in water and alcohol, and the water and alcohol together extract the chemistry, both the water-soluble and fat components of the different chemicals in the plant. And then they discard the plant part, so they throw the fiber out. So you're getting a bottle of water and alcohol with the plant's chemistry. And you take it by dropper full, typically mixed in some water. And that's a really nice way to take herbs. I do a fair number of herbs like that and enjoy them. I like to experience the flavor, though many of them are very, very bitter. When I'm trying a new herb, I like to do a tincture. The limitation of that is if you're taking a lot of different herbs, you're getting a fair amount of alcohol and you're having to take a lot of this liquid. But it is a nice way to start out with things and to experience the herb. What I do most of my products and how I took most of my herbs during the recovery was what are called standardized extracts. So basically what that is they take the water alcohol tincture, spray it on the surface, dry off the water and alcohol, and collect the powder. So it's the pure chemistry of the plant. And you fit it into a capsule. It looks just like that whole herb extract. Same thing. It's just a capsule full of powder, but it's the pure chemistry without the fiber. They're very, very potent. And they're on average 10 times more potent, 10 capsules to 1 capsule for the whole herb powder.
Because I think that's a lot of what I've experienced is I've done a fair amount of experimentation with Chinese herbs through going to acupuncture over the years and working with those herbs. And sometimes it would be like 20 pills in a day to get what you needed. I'm like, this is way too many pills to swallow of this one herb.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. So if you look on the bottle and it just lists the name, the common name of the herb, and it doesn't say standardized extract, you're getting a whole herb powder and you're not really getting very much. So what you want to look for standardized extract is it will give the scientific name of the herb and typically with the common name, and it will say standardized extract, and it will be standardized to a specific key chemical, a key phytochemical in there. So it'll be standardized to 1% Vitexin, whatever. And if you're seeing that, and typically you would see the milligram quantity being used for every herb, not a proprietary blend, then you know you're getting a decent product that they're actually putting some money. Because 10 times more potent isn't 10 times more expensive, but it is more expensive. And so typically what most companies are going to do, because most people are naive, is they're going to use whole herb powders and make it sound great when it's really not.
But then I think just had thought, what's more expensive, taking these herbs that protect cellular health or ending up with a chronic disease and having to spend a lot more money down the road?
I firmly believe if everyone took the regimen of herbs that I recommend in that book, everyone in the country started doing that tomorrow, within a year, we would drop our rate of chronic illness by half. I really believe that.
And that's without changing diet and exercise, or with all that as well?
Well, of course, we'd love everybody to do that too, but yeah, without changing anything, that alone.
Wow. Well,
it's incredible.
Speaking of the book and how you help people, where can people connect with you and how can they get more of this information and get some of these herbs and start supporting their own health?
Yeah. A lot of what we do in our company is help people struggling with different kinds of health adversity. So I would love for anyone to take herbs, but our primary focus with our Vital Plan company is folks that are struggling with something. And I found that everybody's struggling with something, it seems, but people who are struggling, that are trying to overcome a health adversity of some type, that we're making the level of quality of products that can really make a difference in our lives. So Vital Plan is the company. We're getting ready to start a new community. I've started creating courses to carry people through that process and learn something more about the things that we've discussed during this podcast and how to really use herbs and these other lifestyle modifications to make a huge difference in their lives.
Yeah, I feel like today we scratched the surface, and I feel
barely scratched the surface.
And I feel really excited to learn more and to dive more into herbs and how they can work into our life, because we've dabbled here and there, but we've never really committed or understood exactly the right quantity or quality of these products. So this has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, it is. It really doesn't matter what topic of health you're talking about. When you take it down to the cellular level, it starts making sense. And that's where we start to see why herbs can be so important. But yeah, going beyond just the topics we talked about, starting to look at that dormant microbe connection with cancer and how herbs can protect us from cancer. Oh boy, there's just so many ways that we can utilize these things to make our lives better.
Wow, that's amazing. And I just want to remind the listeners that they can get a copy of your book, The Cellular Wellness Solution. If you're watching the video, Mackie just put up a picture of the book. And then with the purchase of the book, you're entitled to free access to the Cellular Wellness Solution resource page if you go to cellularwellness.com/extras. Very cool. And I'm really excited about this community that you're creating and the courses to learn more about that, and that you're working with people and patients to help them. That's really cool. I love having resources to send people, because I get asked all the time, do you know anybody? I have chronic issues going on, and it's tough to know where to turn to help people.
It is. And I think sometimes we make it a lot more complicated than it has to be. I actually gave up my medical practice about 5 years ago when I just I found that doing all the lab work and all the different things that were being done, it has value, but if I could teach the person how to take care of themselves or how to recover, then I was doing much more good. And
Yeah.
hey, I get it. When we feel bad, when we're not well, we all want to just go in somewhere and have an injection or a prescription or whatever and just know that everything's going to be fine. But it's just not that easy. People who overcome chronic illness of any kind are the people that become proactive and really take charge of their recovery.
Yeah, or give a person a fish, feed him for a day, teach a person how to fish, and feed him for life.
Exactly. It definitely applies.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Pleasure.
I learned so much, and I hope our listeners did too. Just a reminder to the listeners to rate and review the podcast on Spotify or Apple. And if you're not watching on YouTube right now, we put all of our shows on YouTube so you can watch our guests and us on video. And anything else, Mackie?
Nope, that's
All
it.
right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Rawls.
My pleasure. Thanks.